The stagecoach kicked up dust as it barreled down the rutted road toward Clearwater Station, Wyoming Territory, 1878. Clara Lawson clutched the crumpled telegram in her hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her entire future had been decided by a piece of paper bearing the words, "Arrangements made, stop passage, paid, stop arrive Clearwater June 15th, stop prepare for immediate wedding, stop Edward Thornton." The man who would soon be her husband was nothing more than a name, a stranger who had responded to her uncle's advertisement seeking a suitable match for his troublesome niece. The morning air was crisp as Clara descended from the stagecoach, her legs stiff from the grueling 2-day journey from Cheyenne. At 21, she had expected more time before being married off, but her uncle's patience had run thin after her third refusal of local suitors. "This is what happens to ungrateful girls," he had said while packing her trunk, filling it with the practical clothing befitting a frontier wife. Not a single item had been chosen by Clara herself. "Miss Lawson," a tall man with a salt and pepper beard approached, removing his hat. "I'm Samuel Wilson, the station manager. Mr. Thornton sent word he'll meet you at his property. I'm to escort you the rest of the way." Clara nodded, unable to find her voice. The reality of her situation was sinking in with each passing moment. In less than 24 hours, she would be married to a man whose face she had never seen, whose voice she had never heard, whose character she could only guess at from the terse telegrams he had exchanged with her uncle. They loaded her trunk onto a wagon and set out from the station. Clara watched as the small outpost of civilization receded behind them, replaced by endless rolling plains and distant mountains. The beauty of the landscape would have captivated her under different circumstances. "What kind of man is Mr. Thornton?" she finally asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Samuel shifted uncomfortably on the wagon bench. "Edward's a successful man, owns the largest cattle operation in the territory, built it from nothing, they say." "I see." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. "And his temperament?" Samuel kept his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's not my place to say, Miss Lawson." The wagon rattled over a particularly deep rut, nearly unseating Clara. As she steadied herself, she noticed a lone rider approaching from the south, the silhouette unmistakable against the setting sun, a man on horseback, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this wild country. "Looks like we've got company," Samuel muttered, reaching for the rifle beneath the seat. The rider approached at a steady trot, and as he drew closer, Clara could make out a lean figure dressed in practical range clothes, denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Not the attire she would expect from a wealthy cattle baron. "Afternoon, Samuel," the rider called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Samuel relaxed visibly. "Finnegan, wasn't expecting to see you out this way." The man called Finnegan guided his horse alongside the wagon, and Clara found herself looking into the most arresting pair of blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face that couldn't have been much older than 30. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture both polite and appraising. "Miss," he acknowledged before turning back to Samuel. "Word travels fast. Heard you were bringing Edward's bride to be out to the ranch." Samuel nodded. "This here is Miss Clara Lawson. Miss Lawson, meet Finnegan Archer. Best horse wrangler in 3 territories and a decent neighbor when he wants to be." "Pleasure, Miss Lawson," Finnegan said, his gaze lingering on her face. Something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of concern quickly masked. "You headed straight to Thornton's place?" "That's the plan," Samuel replied. "Got orders to deliver her by sundown." Finnegan's jaw tightened. He rode silently beside them for several moments before speaking again. "I'll ride along if you don't mind," was heading that direction anyway. Clara felt a curious mixture of relief and anxiety at his offer. This man was clearly not what she had expected to encounter in Wyoming Territory. There was intelligence in his eyes and something else, a watchfulness that made her wonder what he was looking for. "So, Miss Lawson," Finnegan said conversationally as they continued, "what brings a lady like yourself out to these parts, besides the obvious impending nuptials, that is?" "My uncle arranged it," Clara replied stiffly. He felt it was time I was settled, and you agreed with his assessment. Samuel shot Finnegan a warning look, but Clara found herself answering honestly. I had little choice in the matter. My parents died when I was 16. My uncle took me in, but his patience has limits, particularly when it comes to nieces who show too much. Independence. Finnegan nodded thoughtfully. Independence is both blessing and curse out here. Too little and the land breaks you, too much and. He trailed off, glancing toward the horizon where a cluster of buildings was now visible. Clara followed his gaze. Is that Mr. Thornton's ranch? That's it, Samuel confirmed. Thornton's Echo, they call it, biggest spread between Cheyenne and the Tetons. As they drew closer, Clara could see that the ranch was indeed impressive, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs with glass windows, several outbuildings, a large barn, and corrals containing horses and cattle. It spoke of wealth and permanence in a land where both were hard won. A man emerged from the main house as they approached, and Clara felt her heart sink. Even from a distance, she could tell this was Edward Thornton, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a bearing that suggested he was accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them. He looked to be in his 50s, at least 30 years her senior. Right on time, Wilson, Thornton called out, striding toward the wagon. His gaze fell on Clara, assessing her with the same clinical eye one might use to evaluate livestock. So this is the girl. Not a question, but a statement of ownership. Mr. Thornton, Samuel nodded, helping Clara down from the wagon. Thornton barely acknowledged Finnegan's presence, giving him only the briefest nod before turning his attention back to Clara. You'll do, he said, taking her measure with cold eyes. The preacher will be here tomorrow noon. Wilson can take your trunk to the house. Clara stood rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. Everything was happening too quickly. In less than a day, she would be bound to this stranger, this man who looked at her as if she were merely another acquisition. Perhaps Miss Lawson would like to rest after her journey, Finnegan suggested, dismounting from his horse. The stage from Cheyenne is a rough ride. Thornton's expression hardened. Didn't ask for your opinion, Archer. What are you doing here anyway? Just being neighborly, Finnegan replied, his tone light but his stance unyielding. And I needed to discuss that water rights issue with you. The creek that feeds my southern pasture has been running dry. We can discuss business tomorrow, Thornton said dismissively. After the wedding. Actually, Finnegan said, stepping forward, it might be better if we talked now. It won't take but a few minutes. Something unspoken passed between the two men, a current of tension that Clara could feel even without understanding its source. Finally, Thornton gave a curt nod. Fine, Wilson, show Miss Lawson to the house. Mrs. Bradshaw will get her settled. He turned to Clara. My housekeeper will see to your needs. I'll join you for supper. As Samuel escorted her toward the house, Clara glanced back to see Finnegan and Thornton engaged in what appeared to be a heated conversation, though their voices were too low for her to hear. Finnegan's posture was tense, his hands moving emphatically as he spoke. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bradshaw, was a thin woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She showed Clara to a sparsely furnished but clean bedroom on the second floor of the house. You'll be wanting to freshen up, she said, pouring water into a basin. Supper's at 6 sharp. Mr. Thornton doesn't tolerate tardiness. When Mrs. Bradshaw left, Clara sank onto the bed, finally alone with her thoughts. The room felt like a prison cell despite its decent size and the view of mountains from the window. She opened her trunk, running her fingers over the clothing. Her uncle had selected practical, durable items suitable for a rancher's wife. Nothing frivolous, nothing that might have expressed her personality or preferences. At the bottom of the trunk, hidden beneath a woolen shawl, was the one thing she had managed to pack herself: a small leather-bound journal filled with her writings. Poetry, observations, dreams of a different life. She clutched it to her chest, drawing comfort from this one piece of herself that remained her own. Supper was a strained affair. Edward Thornton spoke little, asking only perfunctory questions about her journey. He outlined his expectations in clipped sentences. She would manage the household, entertain business associates when necessary, and bear children. His first wife had died 5 years earlier, leaving him without an heir. "The ranch needs a woman's touch," he said, as if this explained everything. "And I need sons to carry on after I'm gone." Clara nodded mutely, pushing food around her plate. She had known marriage would be part of her future, but she had always imagined something more: conversation, companionship, perhaps even love in time. Nothing in Thornton's manner suggested any of these possibilities. After the meal, he excused himself to attend to business matters, leaving Clara alone at the table. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by despair. This was to be her life now: days and nights spent with a man who viewed her as little more than a necessary addition to his household. Unable to bear the thought of returning to her room, Clara slipped outside. The evening air was cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She walked without purpose, eventually finding herself near the corral where several horses dozed or grazed quietly. "Couldn't sleep," Clara startled at the voice, turning to find Finnegan Archer leaning against the corral fence, his hat pushed back on his head. "Mr. Archer. I didn't realize you were still here. Thornton offered me a bed in the bunkhouse." Water rights discussion ran longer than expected. He studied her face in the fading light. "You look like you could use some air yourself." Clara nodded, moving to stand beside him at the fence. "It's been overwhelming." "I imagine so." Finnegan was quiet for a moment. "Wyoming Territory isn't an easy place for anyone, but especially not for a woman alone." "I'm not alone," Clara replied automatically. "I'm to be married tomorrow." "Are you?" There was something in his tone that made her look at him sharply. "Seems to me being married and being alone aren't necessarily different states of being." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back furiously. "I have no choice." "There are always choices, Miss Lawson. Some just cost more than others." They stood in silence, watching as the last light faded from the sky. One of the horses in the corral, a sleek palomino, approached the fence, nudging Finnegan's shoulder. "This is Sundown," Finnegan said, scratching the horse behind the ears. "Best cow pony I've ever trained. Sold him to Thornton last spring, but he still remembers me." Clara reached out hesitantly, stroking the horse's velvet nose. "He's beautiful." "Horses know things people don't," Finnegan said quietly. "They can sense a storm coming before there's a cloud in the sky. They know who to trust and who to avoid." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "What do your instincts tell you, Miss Lawson?" Before Clara could answer, footsteps sounded behind them. Mrs. Bradshaw approached, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "There you are, Miss Lawson. Mr. Thornton was asking after you." The housekeeper glanced at Finnegan, her expression unreadable. "You should come inside now." "It's not proper for you to be out here alone." "Of course," Clara said, stepping away from the corral. "Good night, Mr. Archer, Miss Lawson." Finnegan touched the brim of his hat. As she turned to leave, he added softly, "Remember what I said about choices." Clara lay awake long into the night, Finnegan's words echoing in her mind. What choice did she really have? She had no money of her own, nowhere to go, no skills that would earn her a living. The West was not kind to unmarried women with no family or means of support. Yet the thought of binding herself to Edward Thornton for the rest of her life filled her with a dread so profound it felt like physical pain. Morning came too soon. Mrs. Bradshaw appeared with breakfast on a tray and instructions to prepare for the ceremony. The preacher had arrived early and was closeted with Thornton in his study. Ranch hands were setting up chairs in the parlor. Clara moved as if in a dream, washing and dressing mechanically. Mrs. Bradshaw had laid out a dove-gray dress, not white, but the best Clara had brought with her. As the housekeeper helped her with the buttons, Clara caught a glimpse of her reflection in the small mirror on the dresser. She barely recognized the pale, wide-eyed woman staring back at her. "Mrs. Bradshaw," she said suddenly, "were you ever married?" The older woman's hands stilled momentarily. "I was, for 37 years until my Albert passed on. Did you? Did you love him?" Mrs. Bradshaw met Clara's eyes in the mirror. "I did. Not every day was easy, mind you, but there was never a day I regretted choosing him." She hesitated, then added softly, "That's the secret, I think." Marriage works best when it's a choice, not a sentence. A knock at the door interrupted them. Samuel Wilson stood awkwardly in the hallway, hat in hands. "Miss Lawson, sorry to disturb you, but there's been a situation. Mr. Thornton asks that you come downstairs right away." Clara followed Samuel to the parlor, where she found a small gathering of people: the preacher, a nervous-looking man in a black suit, Mrs. Bradshaw, several ranch hands, and Edward Thornton himself, whose face was dark with barely controlled anger. "What's the meaning of this?" Thornton demanded as soon as she entered, thrusting a piece of paper toward her. Clara took it with trembling hands. It was a note written in a bold, clear hand. "Thornton, you know why this isn't right. I'm offering Miss Lawson a different option. If she chooses to stay, so be it. But she deserves to know what kind of man you really are and to make her own decision." "F.A., did you put him up to this?" Thornton's voice was dangerously quiet. "I don't understand," Clara said, genuinely confused. "Put who up to what, Archer?" Thornton spat the name. "Rode off with your trunk at dawn. Left this note saying he's taking it to Julian over in the next county. Says you're welcome to follow if you choose or stay and marry me as planned." Clara stared at him, speechless. Finnegan had taken her trunk. "But why would he do such a thing, and why to a place called Julian?" "I had nothing to do with this," she said finally. "I barely know Mr. Archer." Thornton studied her face, apparently deciding she was telling the truth. His expression shifted from anger to calculation. "Well, this changes nothing. The ceremony will proceed as planned. You don't need those things anyway. I can provide everything you require." "But," Clara's mind raced, "shouldn't we try to recover my possessions? They're all I have." "I'll send men after him later," Thornton said dismissively. "For now, we have a wedding to conduct." He turned to the preacher. "Let's get on with it." The preacher cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should postpone until this matter is resolved. The young lady seems distressed." "Nonsense," Thornton snapped. "A few clothes aren't worth delaying for. Begin the ceremony." As the preacher reluctantly opened his Bible, Clara felt a strange calm descend upon her. Finnegan's note echoed in her mind. She deserves to know what kind of man you really are and to make her own decision. What did he know about Thornton that she didn't? And more importantly, was he truly offering her a choice? The preacher began speaking, his words washing over Clara without registering. Her gaze drifted to the window, where she could see the vast expanse of Wyoming spread out before her, beautiful, dangerous, and full of possibilities she had never considered. "Miss Lawson," the preacher's voice broke through her thoughts. "Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara looked at Edward Thornton, really looked at him. She saw the impatience in his eyes, the proprietary way he reached for her hand, the tightness around his mouth that spoke of a man unaccustomed to being challenged or denied. "I." She began, then stopped, the word hanging in the air between them. Outside, a horse whinnied. Clara's eyes were drawn again to the window, where she saw a familiar Palomino sundown saddled and waiting by the gate, reins loosely tied. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Finnegan Archer wasn't stealing her trunk. He was creating a diversion, giving her the opportunity to choose for herself. The trunk was merely bait, ensuring Thornton would send men in the wrong direction. The real escape route was right outside the window, a fast horse already prepared for flight. "Miss Lawson," the preacher prompted again. "Your answer?" Clara straightened her spine and met Thornton's gaze directly. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I cannot marry you, Mr. Thornton. I apologize for the inconvenience, but this is not right." Thornton's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. You have nowhere to go, no means of support. Don't be a fool, girl." "Perhaps I am a fool," Clara replied, backing toward the door. "But I'd rather be a fool who makes her own mistakes than a wise woman living someone else's idea of her life." Before anyone could react, she turned and ran, hitching up her skirts and dashing through the house and out the front door. She heard shouts behind her but didn't look back, making straight for the Palomino. Years of riding at her uncle's estate had taught her how to mount quickly, even in a dress. She swung into the saddle, grateful for the Western-style arrangement rather than the side saddle she'd been accustomed to back east. Sundown needed little encouragement. As soon as she was seated, the horse leapt forward, clearly eager to run. Clara gave him his head, leaning low over his neck as they galloped away from Thornton's echo. She had no clear idea where she was going, trusting that the horse knew the way to wherever Finnegan waited. The land streamed past in a blur of sage and grass, the wind whipping tears from her eyes. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of pursuit, but sundown was fast and sure-footed, steadily increasing the distance between Clara and her would-be husband. After what seemed like hours but was likely less than one, sundown slowed of his own accord, turning onto a less visible trail that wound through a stand of cottonwoods along a creek bed. The trees provided cover, and the rocky creek bottom would make their tracks harder to follow. The trail eventually opened into a small clearing where a simple cabin stood, smoke curling from its chimney. Finnegan Archer sat on the porch steps, cleaning a rifle. He looked up as she approached, his expression changing from tension to relief. "You came," he said simply, setting the rifle aside and moving to help her dismount. Clara's legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground. The enormity of what she had just done washed over her. I couldn't go through with it." Finnegan nodded, leading Sundown to a small corral behind the cabin. "Thornton's men will be looking for you. We should get inside." The cabin was spare but comfortable, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and what appeared to be a sleeping area partially screened by a curtain. Clara's trunk sat in the corner, still closed. "Why did you do this?" she asked as Finnegan closed the door behind them. "Why help me?" Finnegan ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I know Edward Thornton, known him for years. He's not a good man, Miss Lawson." "Clara," she corrected automatically. "Please call me Clara." "And what do you mean, not a good man?" Finnegan gestured for her to sit at the table. He poured coffee from a pot keeping warm on the stove and set a cup before her before taking the opposite chair. "Thornton's first wife didn't just die," he said quietly. "She killed herself. Couldn't take the isolation, the control, the other things." He looked away, jaw tight. "I worked for him back then, saw how he treated her, saw the bruises she tried to hide." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "That's horrible. It gets worse. After she died, he went through 2 housekeepers in quick succession. Both left in the middle of the night, no explanation. Then last year, he arranged for a bride from back east, young woman, not much older than you. She vanished 3 months after the wedding. Thornton claimed she ran off with a passing drummer, but nobody ever saw her again." A cold chill ran down Clara's spine, and no one investigated. Out here, Thornton practically owns the sheriff in Clearwater Station, and without proof. Finnegan shook his head. "When I heard he'd arranged for another bride, I couldn't just stand by, but I couldn't exactly warn you with him right there either." "So you stole my trunk," Clara said slowly, understanding dawning. "Gave you an excuse to delay the wedding, at least. Wasn't sure you'd actually run, though." A small smile touched his lips. "You've got more spine than I gave you credit for." "I'm not sure if it was spine or simple terror," Clara admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup. "But what happens now? Thornton won't just let this go." "No, he won't," Finnegan agreed grimly. "But we've got a head start. This place is hard to find if you don't know it's here, and I've got friends in Julian who can help us." Julian? Town about 40 miles southwest of here. Smaller than Clearwater but growing. Good people for the most part. And importantly, outside Thornton's sphere of influence. Clara took a sip of coffee, trying to process everything. "Mr. Archer, Finn," he interrupted. "Just Finn is fine." "Finn," she corrected herself. "I'm grateful for your help, truly, but I can't impose on you indefinitely. I need to figure out what to do next." "First things first," Finn said pragmatically. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Once Thornton's men give up the immediate search, we can make for Julian. I've got a small place there too left to me by my father. You can stay there while you decide your next move." Clara nodded slowly. It was more of a plan than she'd had 5 minutes ago. "Thank you, I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," Finn replied with a shrug. "Let's just say I'm making amends for not doing more to help the others." They passed the day in the cabin, speaking little. Finn kept watch from the windows, rifle close at hand, but no riders appeared. As evening approached, he prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits, apologizing for the lack of variety. "I wasn't exactly expecting company when I stocked the pantry," he explained, serving her a plate. "It's delicious," Clara assured him, realizing she was ravenous. "I haven't had much appetite since leaving Cheyenne." After the meal, Finn insisted she take the bed behind the curtain while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. Despite the strange circumstances, Clara felt safer than she had in days. She fell asleep listening to the soft sounds of Finn moving about the cabin, banking the fire for the night. The next morning brought clear skies and no sign of pursuit. After a breakfast of coffee and more biscuits, Finn suggested they move on to Julian. "Best not to push our luck," he said, saddling Sundown and another horse, a sturdy bay gelding. "If Thornton's men haven't found us by now, they're probably searching in the wrong direction, but they'll circle back eventually." Clara changed from her gray dress into a more practical riding outfit. She found in her trunk a divided skirt and blouse that her uncle had included for ranch life. Finn raised an eyebrow when she emerged from the cabin. "Better for riding," she explained, feeling self-conscious under his gaze. "Practical," he agreed, helping her mount Sundown. "Horse knows you now, he'll take good care of you." The journey to Julian took most of the day, following trails that weren't marked on any map, Finn said. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and dried fruit. Clara found herself studying Finn when he wasn't looking the way he moved with quiet confidence, how his hands were gentle with the horses but strong and capable, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked as they rode side by side through a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers. "Came out with my father when I was 14, Finn replied. "That was 1862. He fought in the war between the states, came back changed, said he couldn't live in civilization anymore, needed open spaces to heal. So we headed west, ended up in Wyoming Territory. And your mother died when I was small, don't remember her much." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "I lost my parents too, though I was older." Finn nodded in understanding. "Makes you grow up fast, doesn't it?" "Yes," Clara agreed, surprised by how easily she could talk to this man she barely knew. "My uncle meant well, I suppose, but he never understood me. Always said I had too many ideas, read too many books. That's why he was so eager to marry me off." "And what would you have chosen if the choice had been yours from the start?" Finn asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. Clara considered the question. "I'm not entirely sure. I always loved learning, perhaps teaching, or writing. I've kept journals for years." She laughed self-consciously. "Silly dreams for a woman, I know." "Not silly at all," Finn said seriously. "Dreams are what keep us going. Without them, we're just surviving, not living." They crested a rise late in the afternoon, and Clara caught her first glimpse of Julian. It was indeed smaller than Clearwater Station, but appeared more vibrant somehow. Buildings lined a main street, with homes scattered around the perimeter. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and even from a distance, she could see people moving about, going about their business. "It's not much," Finn said, watching her reaction, "but it's a good place. Folks mind their own business but help when it's needed." "It looks wonderful," Clara replied honestly. After the isolation of Thornton's ranch, the small town seemed like a bustling metropolis. They rode down the hill toward Julian, Finn leading the way to a modest house on the edge of town. It was small but well-maintained, with a neat yard and a covered porch. "This is it," he said, dismounting and helping Clara down. "My father built it before he died. I don't stay here much, prefer my cabin most of the time, but it's yours for as long as you need it." Clara stood in the yard, overwhelmed by his generosity. "Finn, I can't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly, "at least until you figure out your next steps. Besides, folks around here know me. No one will question you staying in my house, they'll just assume you're family visiting." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, a small parlor, a kitchen with a decent stove, and even a few bookshelves stocked with well-worn volumes. Clara ran her fingers along the spine's history, poetry, novels she had read and others she hadn't. "Your father's?" she asked, pulling out a volume of Wordsworth. "Some his, some mine," Finn admitted. Told you I understood about books." He brought in her trunk and showed her around the house, explaining where to find everything she might need. "I'll bring supplies in the morning, food, firewood, whatever else you require." "You're not staying?" Clara asked, surprised by her own disappointment. Finn shook his head. "Wouldn't be proper. I've got a room at the boarding house when I'm in town. It's just down the street if you need anything." After he left, Clara explored the house more thoroughly. It was clean, if a bit dusty from disuse, with simple, sturdy furniture and a few touches that spoke of care: handmade quilts on the beds, curtains at the windows, a rocking chair by the fireplace. It felt more like a home than any place she had lived since her parents died. She unpacked her trunk, arranging her meager possessions in the bedroom Finn had indicated was hers. At the bottom, she found her journal, still safely hidden where she had placed it. Clara sat on the bed and began to write, pouring out everything that had happened since she had left Cheyenne. The words flowed easily, bringing clarity to her jumbled thoughts. Finn returned the next morning with supplies as promised: food, firewood, even fresh flowers that he placed awkwardly on the kitchen table. "Thought they might brighten things up," he explained when she looked at them in surprise. "Place has been empty too long." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Finn would come in the morning, often bringing something from the bakery or a piece of news from town. He introduced her to a few people: the shopkeeper who sold her fabric for curtains, the librarian who was delighted to meet someone who appreciated books, the doctor's wife who invited her to tea. To the townspeople, Clara was presented simply as a friend of Finn's family who was staying in his house while deciding whether to settle in Julian. No one questioned this story, though Clara sometimes caught speculative glances from the women she met. Finn Archer, it seemed, was both respected and something of a mystery in Julian. "People seem to think highly of you," she commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Finn had brought supper, a stew from the hotel restaurant, and they had fallen into the habit of sharing the evening meal. Finn looked embarrassed. "I've helped out here and there, nothing special, Mrs. Peterson at the general store says you saved her son when he fell through the ice last winter," Clara persisted. "And Mr. Davis mentioned you rode 60 miles to fetch a doctor when his wife was having trouble with their baby." "Neighbors help neighbors," Finn said with a shrug. "That's all." But it wasn't all, Clara knew. In her time in Julian, she had heard multiple stories about Finn Archer: how he had stood up to cattle rustlers threatening small ranchers, how he taught the schoolchildren to ride safely, how he never turned away anyone in need. The picture that emerged was of a man who lived by his own strict code of honor, who valued actions over words, who gave freely without expectation of return. It was becoming increasingly difficult for Clara to remember that she had known this man for less than 2 weeks. Something about Finn made her feel as if she had known him all her life, or perhaps it was that he seemed to know her, to understand parts of herself that even she was just beginning to discover. One rainy afternoon, Finn arrived with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Thought you might like something new to read," he said, handing it to her almost shyly. Clara unwrapped it to find a journal, bound in soft leather with blank pages waiting to be filled. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the cover. "Noticed you writing in your old one," Finn explained. "Figured you might be running out of space." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Clara's eyes. "Thank you, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Finn replied, clearly uncomfortable with her emotion. "Just thought you might use it, is all." That evening, after Finn had gone, Clara opened the new journal and began to write again, but this time her words were different, not just recording events, but exploring feelings she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. She wrote about Finn: his kindness, his quiet strength, the way his rare smiles transformed his face, how safe she felt in his presence. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. She was falling in love with Finnegan Archer. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had known him such a short time, and her life was still so uncertain. What did she have to offer a man like Finn? She had no money, no skills beyond those of a genteel upbringing, nothing but her heart and mind, yet something had been building between them, something neither had put into words. She saw it in the way his eyes followed her movements, how he listened intently when she spoke, the gentle care he took to anticipate her needs. But was it love, or merely the protectiveness of a decent man toward someone under his care? A week after her arrival in Julian, Clara was returning from the general store when she noticed unusual activity in the town, men on horseback she didn't recognize, asking questions, showing papers to shopkeepers. Her heart sank as she realized what was happening. Thornton's men had tracked her to Julian. She hurried back to the house, trying not to draw attention to herself. As she approached, she saw Finn waiting on the porch, his expression grim. "They're here," she said unnecessarily as she reached him. Finn nodded. "3 of Thornton's men. They're showing a marriage license with your name on it, claiming you're Thornton's runaway bride." "What do we do?" "We need to leave. Now." Finn's voice was calm but urgent. "Pack only what you absolutely need. Horses are ready out back." Clara rushed inside, grabbing her journals, a change of clothes, and a few personal items. Everything fit into a small satchel. When she emerged, Finn was already mounted, leading Sundown by the reins. "Where are we going?" she asked as he helped her into the saddle. "I know a place," he replied cryptically. "Safe for now. We can figure out a longer-term plan once we're away from here." They rode out the back way, avoiding the main street. Clara's heart pounded with fear and, strangely, excitement. There was something almost freeing about being on the move again, heading into the unknown with Finn at her side. They rode hard for several hours, following game trails and dry creek beds to mask their path. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, with steep hills and rock formations that Clara found both beautiful and intimidating. Finally, as dusk was falling, they reached a hidden valley nestled between 2 ridges. "Not many people know about this place," Finn explained as they approached a small structure built into the hillside. "Used to be a line shack for the old Barlow outfit before they went bust. I keep it stocked for emergencies." The shack was little more than a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a small table, and some basic supplies. Finn quickly built a fire while Clara tended to the horses. "Will they find us here?" she asked when they were settled inside, sharing a meal of beans and hardtack. "Not likely," Finn replied. "Trail's hard to follow unless you know it's there, and even if they suspect we headed this way, there are 100 valleys like this one. Would take weeks to search them all." "But we can't stay here forever," Clara said, staring into the fire. "No," Finn agreed. "We need a more permanent solution." He hesitated, then continued carefully. "Have you thought about what you want to do, where you want to go?" Clara looked up, meeting his gaze across the small space. "I don't want to leave Wyoming," she said with sudden certainty. "This is the first place I've felt free." Something flickered in Finn's eyes. "Hope, perhaps." "There are options," he said slowly. "You could file a homestead claim of your own. Government gives land to settlers willing to improve it." "Could a woman do that alone?" Clara asked, surprised. "It wouldn't be easy," Finn admitted, "but it's possible." Or, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his next words. "Or," Clara prompted, heart racing. Finn stood abruptly, moving to the door and opening it to let in the cool night air. He stared out into the darkness for a long moment before speaking again. "Or you could stay with me." The words were so quiet Clara almost didn't hear them. Not like Thornton wanted, not as a possession or a breeding mare, but as a partner, if you wanted. Clara rose from her seat, moving to stand beside him in the doorway. "Are you asking me to marry you, Finnegan Archer?" He turned to face her, vulnerability plain in his eyes. "I know it's too soon, we barely know each other, and I'm not a wealthy man like Thornton. My place is small and the work is hard, and I can't promise it will ever be easy," but Clara placed her fingers gently against his lips, silencing him. "That's not what I asked." Finn took a deep breath. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm asking you to marry me. Not because you need protection or because it's convenient, but because in the short time I've known you, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible." "How would it be different from what Thornton offered?" Clara asked, needing to hear him say it. "I don't want a wife to cook my meals and bear my children," Finn said quietly. I want a partner to share my life, someone to talk with at the end of the day, someone who sees me as I am and chooses me anyway. He reached out tentatively, taking her hand in his. I want you to have choices, Clara. Real ones. If you say no, I'll still help you however I can. If you need time to think, I'll give you that too. Clara looked at their joined hands, then up at Finn's face. In his eyes, she saw none of the cold possession she had seen in Edward Thornton's gaze. Instead, there was warmth, respect, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. I don't need time, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. My answer is yes. Finn's expression transformed with joy and disbelief. Are you certain? In answer, Clara rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, but deepened as Finn's arms came around her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly. I've never been more certain of anything, Clara whispered against his lips. They were married 3 days later in a small church in a town called Fairview, far from Julian and even farther from Thornton's reach. The preacher asked few questions, and the only witnesses were the church caretaker and his wife. Clara wore her gray dress again, but this time her heart was light as she spoke her vows. They spent their wedding night at the town's small hotel before beginning the journey to Finn's ranch, a modest spread nestled in a valley with good water and sheltered pastures. The main house was similar to the cabin where they had first taken refuge, but larger, with 2 rooms and a sturdy roof that didn't leak. It's not much, Finn said apologetically as he carried Clara over the threshold, but it's ours. It's perfect, Clara replied, meaning it. After the grandeur and emptiness of Thornton's Echo, the small house felt like a true home. Life settled into a rhythm unlike anything Clara had known before. The work was hard, as Finn had warned, cooking, cleaning, helping with the livestock, learning to garden in the challenging climate, but it was work shared between them. Finn never assumed Clara would handle certain tasks simply because she was a woman. Instead, they divided labor based on skill and preference. He taught her to ride better, to shoot accurately, to identify edible plants. She taught him to make bread, to mend clothing efficiently, to appreciate poetry read aloud by the fire in the evenings. They would sit together on the porch or by the fireplace, talking about their day, making plans for their future. Clara continued to write in the journal Finn had given her, filling it with observations, poems, and stories inspired by their life together. Sometimes she would read passages aloud, and Finn would listen with genuine interest, offering encouragement and honest feedback. You have a gift, he told her one night after she had read him a poem about the changing seasons. You should share it with others. With Finn's encouragement, Clara began sending short pieces to newspapers in Cheyenne and Denver. To her surprise and delight, several were published, sometimes with a small payment enclosed. It wasn't much, but it gave her a sense of accomplishment beyond the boundaries of their ranch. News of Edward Thornton reached them occasionally. He had apparently given up searching for Clara after a few months, turning his attention instead to expanding his cattle operation. There were rumors that he was seeking another bride from back east. Should we warn her? Clara asked when they heard this news. Finn considered the question seriously. We could try, but Thornton's a powerful man. Our word against his wouldn't count for much. In the end, they sent an anonymous letter to the address where Thornton's mail was delivered, warning of his history and character. Whether it reached its intended recipient, they never knew. But the rumors of a new bride faded, and they allowed themselves to hope that their warning had made a difference. As their first anniversary approached, Clara had news of her own to share. One evening as they sat by the fire, she took Finn's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby, she said, watching his face for his reaction. Finn's eyes widened, then filled with a joy so intense it took her breath away. A baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Our baby. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. Thank you, he whispered against her hair, for choosing me, for making a life with me. I should be thanking you, Clara replied, leaning back to look into his eyes. You gave me the choice when no one else would. Their son, Samuel, was born the following spring, a healthy, strong boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Clara had never imagined the depth of love she would feel for this small person they had created together. Watching Finn with their son, the gentleness of his large hands as he cradled the baby, the wonder in his expression as tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, only deepened her love for her husband. Life wasn't without challenges. The following year brought a harsh winter that threatened their livestock. The year after that, drought made water scarce and grazing difficult, but they faced each challenge together as partners in truth as well as name. Their family grew again with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth, when Samuel was 3. The small house expanded too, with Finn adding rooms as they needed them, a proper bedroom for the children, a small study where Clara could write without interruption, a larger kitchen where they often gathered as a family. Clara's writing flourished alongside their ranch and family. What had begun as occasional submissions to newspapers evolved into regular columns, then stories, and finally a book, a collection of tales about life in the West from a woman's perspective that found a surprising audience back east. The income from her writing supplemented the ranch's earnings, allowing them to weather difficult seasons more comfortably. 5 years after their wedding, they received an unexpected visitor. Clara was in the yard, hanging laundry while the children played nearby, when a rider approached. She shaded her eyes, trying to make out the figure against the sun. As the visitor drew closer, she recognized Samuel Wilson, the station manager from Clearwater who had first escorted her to Thornton's ranch. "Mrs. Archer," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Been a while." "Mr. Wilson," Clara acknowledged cautiously. "What brings you to our home?" "News," he replied simply. "Thought you and your husband should hear it from someone you know." Finn appeared from the barn, alerted by the arrival of a stranger. His hand rested near his holster until he recognized their visitor. "Wilson," he said, stepping forward to shake the man's hand. "Come inside. You look like you could use a drink." Over coffee at their kitchen table, Wilson delivered his news. Edward Thornton was dead, killed in a confrontation with a neighboring rancher over water rights. "Shot him in broad daylight in front of the bank in Clearwater," Wilson explained. Claimed Thornton had been damming the creek illegally, diverting water from his land. Jury called it self-defense, given Thornton's reputation. Clara and Finn exchanged glances across the table. Neither felt joy at the news of a man's death, but there was undeniable relief in knowing that the shadow of Edward Thornton no longer hung over their lives. "There's more," Wilson continued, looking uncomfortable. In going through Thornton's papers, they found evidence about his first wife, and the housekeeper who disappeared, and the bride from back east. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "He killed them," Wilson nodded grimly. "Looks that way, diaries, letters, even a map that seems to show." He trailed off, unwilling to voice the grim details. "Let's just say it's clear now why he wanted a wife from far away, someone with no local connections who wouldn't be missed." Finn reached across the table, taking Clara's hand in his. "You were right to run," Wilson told her. "And you," he added, looking at Finn, "were right to help her." After Wilson left, Clara and Finn sat on the porch swing, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Samuel was teaching Elizabeth how to throw a lasso, the rope far too big for her small hands, but her determination undimmed by repeated failure. "She gets that from you," Finn said, smiling as their daughter tried again. "The stubbornness, I think that's all you," Clara replied, leaning against his shoulder. "The courage," Finn corrected. "Running from Thornton that day took more courage than anything I've ever done." Clara thought about the frightened young woman she had been, facing an unwanted marriage to a man she didn't know. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but staying would have been worse. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't interfered, if I hadn't taken your trunk that day?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think I would have found another way out, but I'm not sure I would have been brave enough without that push." She turned to look at him. "You gave me a choice when everyone else was taking them away. That's why I fell in love with you." Finn smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening in the way she had come to adore. And here I thought it was my charming personality and good looks. Clara laughed, swatting his arm playfully. Those didn't hurt either. He grew serious again, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. That day when you rode up to my cabin, I already knew I was in trouble. You looked so determined, so alive. Nothing like the scared girl I'd seen arrive on that stagecoach. I wasn't sure you'd be there, Clara admitted. I just knew I couldn't marry Thornton, and Sundown seemed to know where to go. Smart horse, Finn murmured, pulling her closer. Best decision I ever made, leaving him at that gate. As twilight deepened into night, they called the children in for supper. Later, after Samuel and Elizabeth were tucked into bed, Clara found Finn sitting at the kitchen table, looking through an old newspaper. "What's that?" she asked, sitting beside him. He pushed the paper toward her. "Found it when I was clearing out the storage shed last week. Thought you might want to see it." It was a copy of the Cheyenne Daily, dated 6 years earlier. A small advertisement was circled in pencil: wanted, wife for prosperous rancher, must be young, healthy, and of good character, passage paid to Wyoming Territory. Apply to G. Lawson, Boston, Mass. Clara stared at the advertisement that had changed the course of her life. "My uncle's work," she said softly. "He never even told me he'd placed it. If he hadn't," Finn said thoughtfully, "you might never have come west, we might never have met." "True," Clara acknowledged. "But I'm not sure I can thank him for trying to sell me to the highest bidder." Finn nodded in understanding. "Sometimes the worst decisions lead to the best outcomes. Not that I'd recommend your uncle's approach to matchmaking." Clara smiled, thinking of how far she had come from the sheltered young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach. "No, but I do like our version better." "And what version is that?" Finn asked, drawing her onto his lap. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her forehead to his. "They packed her trunk for a man she'd never met," she recited, as if telling a fairy tale, but a cowboy said, "Let me earn your yes instead." Finn's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Did I say that? Sounds fancier than my usual talk." "Maybe not in those exact words," Clara conceded. "But that's what you did. You didn't demand or assume. You earned my love day by day." "Still earning it," Finn said, his voice growing serious. "Always will be." As they sat together in the quiet kitchen of the home they had built, Clara thought about the life they had created, not the one planned for her by others, but the one she had chosen for herself. A life of hard work and simple joys, of challenges met together and victories shared. A life with a man who had given her the freedom to say yes, because he had first given her the freedom to say no. Outside, the Wyoming night spread vast and starry above their small ranch. Inside, wrapped in Finn's arms, Clara was exactly where she wanted to be, not because she had no other options, but because this was the life and the love she had chosen. In the years that followed, their family and ranch continued to flourish. Clara's books gained popularity, offering readers back east a glimpse of frontier life through a woman's eyes. Finn expanded their operation, focusing on breeding quality horses rather than cattle, developing a reputation for animals as reliable and strong as their owner. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's love of words and his father's affinity for horses. Elizabeth became a spirited, independent girl who announced at age 10 that she intended to be both a rancher and a writer, like Mama and Papa together. A third child joined their family when the older two were nearly grown, a surprise son they named James, who brought renewed laughter and energy to their home. Their land expanded too, not through the aggressive acquisition methods of men like Thornton, but through careful stewardship and wise investments. They added orchards that thrived despite the harsh climate, fields of hardy wheat, and eventually a small school on the edge of their property where Clara taught the children of neighboring ranches alongside their own. Julian grew from a small settlement into a proper town, with Finn serving on its first official council. Clara established a lending library, stocking it with books purchased with the proceeds from her writing and donations from readers who learned of the project through her published work. Through it all, they remained partners in every sense, sharing work and dreams, challenges and triumphs, building a life neither could have imagined that day when Clara first arrived in Wyoming Territory, her trunk packed by others for a future not of her choosing. On their 25th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. After the guests had gone, Finn and Clara sat on the porch of their expanded home, gray now touching their hair but their eyes still bright with the same light that had drawn them to each other. Any regrets? Finn asked, his hand warm around hers. Clara thought about the question, about the long road that had brought them here. Not a single one, she said with absolute certainty. Every choice led me to you, to this life we've built together. How could I regret that? Finn smiled, the same smile that still made her heart beat faster after all these years. I was thinking, he said casually, maybe we should take a trip, see some of those places you've written about but never visited. Clara looked at him in surprise. In all their years together, neither had strayed far from their Wyoming home. Really, where would you want to go? Anywhere, Finn replied simply. Everywhere, as long as it's with you. And so, in their silver years, they embarked on new adventures, visiting the grand cities of the East, the wild coasts of California, even venturing abroad to the countries Clara had only read about in books. They returned always to their ranch, to the life and family they had built, carrying with them new experiences and stories to share in quiet moments. Clara sometimes thought back to that frightened young woman on the stagecoach, heading toward a future arranged by others. How different her life might have been without the courage to run, without a man who respected her enough to offer a choice rather than a command. "What are you thinking about?" Finn asked one evening as they sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders as it had been countless nights before. Clara smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking about how some journeys end exactly where they're supposed to, even when they take an unexpected path to get there." "And has your journey ended where it was supposed to?" Finn asked, a hint of his old vulnerability in the question. Clara looked up at the man who had helped her find not just safety but joy, not just protection but partnership, not just escape but home. "It's still going," she said softly, "but yes, this is exactly where I was always meant to be." Outside, stars scattered across the Wyoming sky like diamonds on velvet. Inside, Clara and Finn Archer held each other close, two people who had discovered the most important truth of all, that love freely chosen is the greatest treasure and the most enduring legacy anyone can leave behind.